Hello, people. I'm going to start this video with a question. What is the definition of an extremist? What's the definition of an extremist? Well, it's one of those terms that is perhaps a bit abstract. It requires a bit of thought. It's not something that is easily defined. But I think that one way to look at it is someone who justifies their own behavior and their own actions that are negatively hurting other people. They justify it on the grounds of a greater good. Now, during the Troubles, when the IRA and other terrorist groups slaughtered innocent people, I mean, they slaughtered soldiers and other paramilitaries as well, but they killed a lot of innocent people and wounded a lot of innocent people. Later on, when things had de-escalated after the Good Friday Agreement and so on, the IRA would say things like they regretted that civilians died, and they were sorry that civilians died, but they still said that they had no choice. Now, when I see Insulate Britain, I see the same sort of mindset. I really do. But let's be clear, so far they haven't killed anyone, and they're not planting bombs, and they're not shooting people. But I do think they're extremists because they are making threats. They're vowing to continue doing what they're doing, despite being told repeatedly and knowing that it's hurting innocent people. I think the country was united in disgust when they stopped an ambulance getting through. I believe it was in somewhere in East London. I think it was near the Blackwall Tunnel because they're banned from the M25, so they've moved now to other thoroughfares, um, other road networks, I should say. I've just watched an interview with Zoe Cohen. She's one of their activists, one of their spokespeople. I'm even reluctant to call them activists. I don't want to legitimize them, but she was interviewed by Simon McCoy and Kirsty Gallagher on GB News, and this claim that GB News is the British Fox, I don't accept that. They were very reasonable. They were calm. They weren't shouting at her. They were just asking questions. Um, and staying very calm and collected, actually, considering the absolute nonsense that she was regurgitating. Now, there's certain talking points that they come out with, and one that I think really, really needs to be robustly challenged is this claim they keep making that they've got no choice. They say they're ordinary people who've been forced to these extreme measures because the government doesn't listen. That's the narrative. But, a lot of people feel frustrated with a lot of issues. I feel immensely frustrated at our criminal justice system. I feel immensely frustrated that our judges, in my opinion, are largely unaccountable to the public. I feel immensely frustrated at soft sentencing. It infuriates me. And I've signed petitions, I've made videos, and if I get into politics, I want to do what I can to change that situation. So my point is, most people will see things in society that they don't like, that they want to change. And a lot of people might feel powerless. But in a democracy, as opposed to a totalitarian state, we have the freedom to organize, to campaign, to lobby for change. But with freedom comes responsibility. So, as an example, if I was to, let's say, block entrance to a courtroom because I didn't like the decisions of a particular judge, I couldn't justify it by saying, well, this judge is, unaccountable, and he or she keeps issuing soft sentence to dangerous criminals. It infuriates me. I'm doing this for the greater good, so I'm going to block the entrance to this courtroom or something like that. Well, what would that do? That would just hold up the process of another case. It wouldn't get me what I want. I'd just be arrested probably for trespassing or for contempt of court or something like that. So it wouldn't achieve the objective. The point about democracy is you don't always get what you want. I mean, well, not the point of it, but it's one aspect of it. You don't, this idea that freedom means you always get what you want, it's nonsense. It doesn't exist in that way. Rather, what you have is a plurality. That is to say that everyone has a right to their opinion, everyone has the right to basic human rights, and one of those is freedom to peacefully dissent. But this argument that they have no choice, they have a choice. They're just choosing to take this approach. That's the first thing. Second point is, and by the way, I know I've talked about them before, but this is still a newsworthy issue. They're not going anywhere. They've made the threats very clear. They've vowed to keep going. So long as it's an issue, I will talk about it. That's the approach I've always taken, by the way. I've never sort of said, well, this is one big issue, so I'll talk about it once and that's it. Because there's always new angles, there's always um, developments. I mean, at the moment, for example, I didn't watch her speech, but I know Patel is talking tough. She always does. I mean, she hits the right note for people who believe in conservative toughness. She hits the right notes, but action is the real determining factor. Um, there really is no reason why people who are knowingly breaking the law, who are potentially putting lives at risk, who keep doing it, there is no reason why the consequences shouldn't get tougher. There's no reason why legal bureaucracy should stand in the way of practical solution to this problem. I mean, Zoe Cohen kept saying, we have no choice. We're ordinary people forced to do this. And of course, she made the analogy of suffragettes and other movements, which I've already questioned, because that implies that the more extreme suffragettes, those who planted bombs at MPs' homes, were the ones who got the women the vote. I'm not sure that that was the case. In fact, at the time, it turned public opinion against them, including from many women. I believe that it was the dedication and efforts, and also it didn't help that there was brutal responses in terms of force feeding and so on, which made the public sympathetic to them. I think there was a combination of factors that led the women getting the vote. Um, but this is a tactic, of hardline activists. They always like to draw these analogies. Um, the point about the suffragettes and the civil rights movement in the United States was there was a turning point where the public got on side. Now, in that sense, Insulate Britain has utterly failed. Extinction Rebellion failed. Insulate Britain actually think that Extinction Rebellion are too moderate. I mean, that is where they are. They actually think Extinction Rebellion are too moderate. But their arguments are just, in terms of the protests, are just so infuriatingly tone deaf. Um, I mean, they're told over and over again it isn't the issue that they're raising that people are questioning, because they have this arrogant self righteousness that they know more than the rest of us, right? Um, I think some of the issues they bring up are valid. I mean, fuel poverty is a real issue, and insulating homes is something that certainly probably needs to be done a lot more. Although she said it's simple, it just shows a profound ignorance of governing. Of course, it's not simple to insulate millions and millions of homes in a country of 67 million people. That's to say it's simple. That's ridiculous. Um, but when they talk about the climate emergency and we don't take this seriously, we're hosting a global climate summit. Leaders from around the world will be gathering in Glasgow. This is the point Simon McCoy made. McCoy, excuse me. Um, so to say that we don't take it seriously, I honestly think, I honestly think that hardline eco zealots want us all to be living in huts without electricity, without modernity of any kind. Well, you don't help future generations by trying to, just push against society in this way, because that's what it is. It's thing Antisocial doesn't even sum it up. It's almost sociopathic. I mean, they're anarchists, really. They say they're ordinary people, and they might come from relatively ordinary backgrounds, as has often been commented. They tend to be middle class. A lot of them are older people. Okay, so they're retirees who don't have to think about getting into work. Um, and they say they're doing it for the greater good. But the point is, and Zoe Cohen made this point, give us what we want or else. That's a threat. That's not peaceful. Knowing that you're hurting the public and continuing to do so is not peaceful. And this is another one of their false narratives. We're peaceful protesters. No, you're not. You're hurting people, not peaceful. Just because you're not throwing punches or throwing petrol bombs doesn't mean that you're peaceful. And I sometimes wonder what it must be like to be in their shoes. I mean, they must have an idea that they're really infuriating the wider public. They must have an idea that they are frankly making people hate them, and yet they still do it. So is it really because they think they have no choice? Is it because they're genuinely scared and they've been sort of radicalized into this? Or I wonder, is it kind of like this sense of, well, the public hate us, but one day the public will thank us? Almost this martyrdom type feeling. I think they sort of see themselves as a bit like freedom riders who were, certainly in the Deep South, given a very rough time. Like people who sat in diners that were segregated and, they got all sorts of abuse, black and white. So I think these people sort of see themselves in the same vein. But I do think it's different because the civil rights activists didn't endanger lives. They did not get to a point where they were infuriating the public, the wider public, so much. Okay, in the United States and the Deep South, probably they were polarizing and they angered a lot of people. History, of course, vindicated them. But I don't think this is the same situation. Even if, let's say, 10 years from now, right, British summers are getting a lot hotter and we have heat waves like what happened in Canada, and we have increased flooding. Apparently, there was reports of flooding in London yesterday. And these things do get worse in terms of climate. Are we going to look back and say, "Oh, well, they were right all along"? I don't think so, because no one is questioning the message. No one is saying the message is wrong. No one is saying that this isn't a serious issue. I think there is some debate over the terminology, i.e., climate emergency. I think that's somewhat hyperbolic. I mean, the idea, Extinction Rebellion, for example, has claimed that billions of people will die within a few years. That is extremely reckless rhetoric. Is it an emergency? I think it's a very pressing issue, probably the most pressing issue facing the world. But I think it's reckless to scaremonger in that way, to scare children. I mean, she kept saying that only 28% of young people trust the government. Well, it doesn't help that groups like this are brainwashing young people with these sort of dystopian visions. Also, there's another point that some people have raised, which is that as actual contributions of CO2 go, the UK is very, very small on this. We may have been the world's first industrialized country, but in terms of the percentage of emissions, we're very low. I mean, major emitters like China, India, and the United States take up a much, much bigger bulk. So let's say that Britain completely goes the way that they want. That's still, even if that was to happen, it still won't benefit the total outcome unless countries like India, China, and the United States radically change. Um, I know in China, Xi Jinping, it's kind of amusing. This is slightly off topic, but apparently China is now begging Australia for help, Well, I hope Canberra, waits this good old time and just reminds the CCP of their thuggish threats earlier this year, because apparently China relies on Australian coal, or will rely on Australian coal because of um, their supplies. Or I haven't followed it closely, but I think it's kind of poetic justice for Beijing to be begging Australia, and I really hope the Australians make really make a thing of that, because the Chinese state likes to threaten others. And anyway, I detract. Yeah, so that's a question. Why aren't they protesting outside the Chinese or Indian embassies? If they really care about the planet, putting pressure on those governments might actually do something productive. Um, I mean, personally, it doesn't affect me. Their behavior doesn't affect me because I don't drive. I'm not going to be on the M25 or one of those motorways, but I have enormous sympathy for the people that they're hurting. I mean, there was a woman tearfully pleading with them that she had to get her elderly mother to hospital, and they were probably regurgitating the same nonsense, but she couldn't handle it. She had to walk away from them because she was so upset. I mean, there's been many situations like this. I think there is a problem where we're now seeing people taking matters into their own hands. I totally don't blame them. I think they're absolutely justified in doing so. Norman Bremner, who's a justice campaigner and a former police officer, he was actually saying that he doesn't want things to escalate, but he supports the public doing this, and he said he would. And you could tell he was angry. He was talking to their leader, Liam Norton. Um, but these people are utterly, utterly tone deaf. I don't think you can reason with zealots. I don't think you can reason with people who are saying, we threaten this, give us what we want or else. Because time after time after time, members of the public, journalists, people have told them, look, we are not against what you're arguing about. We are just against your methods. I mean, they've said, do this and we will leave the road. So they're blackmailing the country, basically. Do this and we'll leave the road. I do think that the more hardcore members among them need to be in prison. I think Liam Norton needs to be in jail considering he's the leader. Um, on the grounds that he is a criminal, he is promoting criminality, he knows that he is hurting people and he's continuing to do so. I mean, like I said, it doesn't personally affect me because I'm not going to be in that situation, but I imagine if I were, and I'd be seeing red. I mean, if I was trying to get a pregnant wife to hospital, if I had a sick child, I think actually it's a testament to the British that people have been overwhelmingly self-controlled. People haven't been attacking them, people haven't been laying into them, but it would be a very human response to do so. If you're waiting for 6 hours on the M25 and maybe people need to get to bathrooms, maybe there's all sorts of situations. I heard one of them, Cameron Ford, would say, "Oh, these are trivial," or another word he used to just downplay it, and I was disgusted because it shows how utterly out of touch they are. Now, I don't say because the majority are against them, that's why they're wrong. I'm saying on this occasion the majority is right because it's something that has united the whole country. I mean, this isn't just kind of right wing talking points. I've seen people on The Independent, The Guardian condemn them. I've seen environmental people condemn them. They've managed to unite the country in a sense. So suppose they've achieved that, unite the country against them. But they may not be doing what Islamist or far right terrorists are doing in the sense of brutally slaughtering people, but they are definitely at this point, I think, I'm going to say it, I think they're borderline terrorists. And if you sort of respond to that by thinking, well, does that make every dissident a terrorist? Of course not. Of course not. But it angers me that, we live in a country where there is freedom, where people can peacefully protest. But the major caveat is always responsibility, is always introspection. Is what I'm doing right? And I wonder how they organize these things. I wonder if they ever stop to think, well, actually, is this just going to be counterproductive? It'd be interesting to see what goes on in their meetings. I mean, they obviously have strategies. They obviously say, okay, we're going to glue our hand to this junction and we're going to be arrested. We're going to go back. They probably train each other for, confrontation. Um, they're hardcore activists. And like I say, I'm even reluctant to call them that, activists. But anyway, I'm going to round this up, but I do hope they disappear pretty soon. I think the threats need to be taken seriously because, it's gluing their hands to roads one day. I do wonder, are they going to escalate? I mean, because bear in mind, every terrorist group or most terrorist groups start off not with violence, they start off with activism. Then they justify that violence is the only way. So there may come a point where they get violent. They might, sabotage railways or something, and they'll justify it because they'll think that they're moralistic fighters. And I think they need to be taken seriously. I mean, it's easy to laugh at them and dismiss them as these crusties or middle class hippie leftovers, but I actually think there is danger involved in this. I'm actually almost concerned for their sake because although I'd be sympathetic to people taking the law into their own hands, I don't want to see it happening. I don't want elderly anarchists to be beaten up. A lot of them are elderly, and there's another dicey area. I mean, a lot of them are women, so if a male motorist is, it's a dicey area. But I would say equality means equality. If, for example, you have a male driver and he has a sick child, a father, for example, and you have a group of these anarchists lying on the road. Some of them are women, and that male driver then wants to physically remove those women. I would hope that the public sees the context and supports him. And I do believe that if any member of the public is charged with assault or something like that, I think the vast majority of people will be hugely sympathetic, and I think there'll be some sort of crowdfunding or something to support that person's legal appeal because they will totally empathise. Now, Insulate Britain say they use the same line as Extinction Rebellion. Oh, but we're getting people to talk about the issues. Wrong, wrong. People talk about the issues around climate change because they see it. They see it in the news and they experience it directly. I'm sure the people who saw the flooding in London yesterday will be thinking about climate change. That does not mean they're going to say, oh, well, those people lying over the M25 are right. No, it doesn't work that way. I mean, they think very highly of themselves. That they alone know the truth. They alone are waking the rest of us up. It's incredibly arrogant. So they say it's a pity it's come to this. Well, I think it's a pity that it's come to necessitating jail sentences. Our prisons are already overcrowded, but if they're just being arrested and they're going back, then it's obviously not a deterrent. Prison sentences might be. I think there could be other methods as well. The police should have the information about when they're going to plan these sort of things. I don't know if they give them tip-offs that we're going to be on the road at this time. Um, British Transport Police should be waiting for them. Don't even let them get onto the road, just arrest them on site because their intentions are clear. There's no. I would do them under, conspiracy to commit criminal behavior, or I think there's an actual formal term for that. Conspiracy to commit a criminal act. Arrest them for that. Hell, a lot of their identities must be known by now. They've been doing interviews. I would like to see the police knocking on their doors, arresting them. I think they're still being kind of legitimized by all these interviews. I mean, they've been given plenty of airtime to get their point across, so they can't say, "Oh, everyone's picking on us; they're not listening." They're the ones who aren't listening. Anyway, we'll round this up. Um, this I'll close with this. This idea they have that no one cares, that people are apathetic, that no one cares about flooding or rising temperatures. Those are very important issues. And although I think emergency is hyperbolic, I also don't say that it's a small matter. I think it is something that needs to be taken seriously. Um, but their methods are just so polarizing and so infuriating that, they say we're not the story, but they've made themselves the story. And it's not a good one. And if you happen to be part of this group, I mean, I know you're not going to listen, but do yourselves a favor. Do yourselves a favor. Don't ruin your lives with a criminal record by engaging in this nonsense.